Faster than a fraudulent performance measure, stronger than a misplaced decimal point, able to leap complex compliance requirements at a single bound. It's Super Auditor! Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Auditors Save the World, one audit project at a time, where we bring you thrilling tales of daring audits and brave financial reviews. Here, our heroes don't wear capes, but they do wield the power of empirical evidence. Brought to you by the pros at Yellowbook-CPE. In each episode, we interview those legendary auditors who have truly rescued the day. Stay tuned, listeners, because this is one story you won't want to miss. And folks, don't forget to subscribe to our show in your podcast app of choice. And now, here's your host, Lita Hart-Fanta.
Tonight, from the foggy streets of the West Coast, where sirens wail and the citizens demand justice, comes a lone figure with a pocket full of highlighters and a brain like a steel trap. By day, he walks to work like any other mortal, but even then, the gears are turning, the data is whispering, and the audit is already underway. He's the scourge of sloppy documentation, the nemesis of vague performance measures, the hero you didn't know you needed until the findings dropped. It's Steve, the detail defender, armed with trend analysis, unshakable logic, and tests so tight they make villains sweat. Steve took on one of the most sensitive audits in the nation, the police force. Alone, yes. Unarmed, never. He wielded data like a sword and justice like a spreadsheet. And when the dust settled, one word, Knighton. Not just a trophy, a testament. So tune in, truth seekers and audit adventurers, as we uncover the legend of Steve the Detail Defender. Where there's a risk, he tests it. Where there's data, he listens.
But I live in the city and I walk to work. It gives me time to think through what I'm going to do for the day and, just work through some of the issues, especially, I love to hit the ground running when I come into work, whatever audit I've got going on.
Yeah.
Kind of doing the mental assessment of where I'm at with the work plan. What am I going to do today?
Yeah. Well, how many people are on your audit team?
Just me.
Oh, man. Okay, no wonder you got to hit the ground running because you can't delegate to anybody.
Yeah, no. So I think about auditing a lot. I've been told maybe a little bit more than healthy, but I think it's just a consequence of being a one-person team. Like I really got to own every single aspect of the process, everything from, hey, what am I going to be auditing, and including breaking that down into, some more specific areas.
Yeah.
Planning the audit. I don't necessarily have a lot of folks to bounce ideas off of here.
Yeah.
What I do like to do is I like to draw from the work that the rest of my agency is doing. So just a little bit about myself and my agency. So I work for the San Francisco Department of Police Accountability, and the primary function of the agency is to investigate complaints filed by members of the public about on-duty San Francisco police officers.
Wow. Directed by the public. Wow.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
So DPA auditing is a relatively new function here. It was by the will of the voters in 2016 that the authority of this department expanded. Originally, we were known as the Office of Citizen Complaints, but some legislation was proposed in early 2016 to rename it. Initially, I think some of the early legislation was going to call us the Independent Police Oversight Department, which would have given us an acronym of IPOD.
Perfect for the Silicon Valley area, right?
Yeah, but even in 2016, that might have been a little bit dated, and I can imagine it might wreak havoc on the search engine optimization too. But they eventually settled on the Department of Police Accountability. But more than just a name change, like I said, it gave our department a mandate to conduct regular performance audits of the San Francisco Police Department.
Whoa.
And as the charter requires, there's two types of audits that we're supposed to be performing regularly. One is on police use of force, and the other is on how the police department has handled officer misconduct. So two pretty big areas with big implications for public trust.
Yeah.
But, the charter, I think, recognized that, we need flexibility to handle and look at and review other areas as well. And so it grants my department's executive director, the authority to pick other audit topics.
Okay.
And that's what led to this audit here, a combination of the investigative work my department was doing and that discretionary authority to pick other topics for audit. So in 2023, just a little bit background on the audit, my department had begun investigating, complaints filed by members of the public. And during these investigations, they were referring to the stop data that officers were reporting when they had these interactions with members of the public.
Yeah.
And so just to wind it back a little bit, stop data, for those who don't know, is something that California state law requires law enforcement agencies to collect. So basically, anytime they stop or detain an individual, law enforcement officers need to record information, and there's quite a few fields about who they stopped, what was the reason for the stop, what was the outcome of the stop, as well as their perception of demographic information on the individual, such as their race or gender or things like that.
Okay.
And so this is required by California state law. It's something called the Racial and Identity Profiling Act of 2015. And San Francisco, yeah.
Hot topic. I mean, just even saying racial profiling just makes your hair stand up on the back of your neck, right? So sensitive.
Right, very. And that was something that came up, I think, throughout the audit, was just, this kind of concept, particularly around the issues about the perception requirements that officers were required to report to the state.
Mm-hmm.
So San Francisco, I think they were considered a wave one department. California rolled this out in waves.
Okay.
And they focused on large law enforcement agencies first and made them wave one departments. San Francisco had been reporting data under the Racial and Identity Profiling Act since 2018.
Okay.
And just I got a little off track here, but my department was investigating some complaints, and they were going to the stop data when performing these investigations, and they noticed some anomalous patterns in the stop data for the officers they were investigating, particularly around the recording of race. And so there were a couple instances where officers were just, as a practice, marking white as the race of the person they were stopping.
Huh.
And so this kind of became a hot topic locally here in San Francisco at a couple of different levels. So when my department sustains an investigation, they put out what are called openness reports, and these reports are posted monthly. So, the investigation results, although not specific to a single officer, where they don't name names or anything like that, and that's because of California state law, we reported out that we had sustained, an allegation that someone was reporting white as the default practice, or that we were finding officers reporting white as a default practice. This became a kind of a hot topic at our most direct oversight body first, the San Francisco Police Commission.
Mm-hmm.
And then it became a topic of discussion as well at our San Francisco Board of Supervisors, which I guess could be considered like the city council for some other jurisdictions.
Okay.
And, it has implications in a couple different ways. Number one, it's state law. You're supposed to be reporting this information. State law, just requires you to report your perception, and that perception is supposed to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some issues there. But, the questions that were surfaced at both the Police Commission level and the Board of Supervisors level were, is this isolated to an officer or two, or is this the tip of an iceberg of a larger reporting problem within the department?
And you guys found?
So we did quite a bit of testing during this audit, took a really hard look at the data, and it took a look at 5 years worth of the data as well. So basically went back to the beginning of SFPD's reporting to the state on this, looked at the stops in those times. Kind of just myself observed some trends, did some trend analysis to start off, and found that the number of stops reported to the state had been declining from its peak in 2019 to 2022, which was the most complete year of data available at the time I started this audit at the tail end of 2023, early 2024.
Yeah. So in addition to reporting the wrong data, they were just not reporting data. They were just skipping it.
That's what the evidence, indicates.
Okay.
And just to talk about, how this data is useful. So it doesn't just go to the state. Once it goes to the state, a board comes together and they conduct analysis on the data. That analysis is used to put out a public-facing report that contains recommendations for law enforcement agencies to help mitigate against the risk of racial and identity profiling in their practices.
Yeah.
So, those reports could conceivably, those recommendations put out by that board could be adopted by law enforcement agencies. And, as they say, when the data is bad going in, you might be getting bad data output as well, including recommendations, based on the bad data.
Yeah.
So hearing the concerns from the Police Commission, the Board of Supervisors, we initiated an audit. And the audit scope was to take a look at, it was process focused. And so we wanted to look at what processes does the police department have in place to ensure the accuracy and completeness of this data.
Okay.
So one of the first things we looked at was SFPD in policy requires audits of stop data internally in their department. That is a good practice. It was something that was put in place. And then again, just to wind back here with some historical information. In 2016, the police department in San Francisco entered into what's called a collaborative reform with the United States Department of Justice. And I don't know if that's a term many of your listeners are familiar with. I think in most other jurisdictions, I see the term is consent decree.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit different than collaborative reform. So this collaborative reform was not court ordered. It was a case where the police department invited the United States Department of Justice to come in and do an assessment of their operation.
Okay.
So they put out a pretty big report in October of 2016. When that was all said and done, it contained 272 recommendations for the police department across a number of different areas of their operation. But one of the areas where they made recommendations was around adopting processes to ensure the completeness and accuracy of stop data.
Okay. So that started with the Department of Justice then.
Yes.
Was the first to make this. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. At the federal level, right? So they said, as a result of the Department of Justice coming in and making these recommendations, police department then went about establishing policies requiring annual audits to identify what were called, quote, inconsistent stop data entries. As an auditor, it was a little problematic for me because, what does consistency or inconsistency mean in terms of these entries? And I found that wasn't really a term that they defined in their policy.
Oh, no criteria.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah. What is consistent? Yeah. So they didn't define it within their policy. I did find some documents outside of policy in which they represented to the California Department of Justice that what they were going to be checking for was field alignment. Basically making sure what officers write in the narrative section of this form that they have to complete for stop data aligned with some of the drop-down menu options in the data.
Okay. Lots of paperwork for the police officers, right?
Yeah, that was a theme that came up as well. But what I found, in practice is that SFPD was not actually even performing these consistency checks that they represented to Cal DOJ that they were going to be doing.
Oh.
Basically, what they were just doing instead was following up on, they had the ability to tell when officers started a form to report this stop data, but didn't actually complete or submit it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So annually they would just say, hey, we see you've got an existing unfinished stop report. Can you resolve this? And so, in doing my audit, I said, what does this mean for data integrity? Okay. They're able to, find out what's outstanding and get officers to submit those. I guess in a way that could possibly contribute to data completeness, but that practice overlooks other key components of stop data integrity, such as, is this information even accurate?
Sure.
Or are all stops even being reported?
Yeah, that's maybe why the guy just went down, collected them all and just said white, right?
Yeah, he knew nobody was checking
Yeah.
So right off the bat, I don't know if it'd be considered meta to do an audit of an audit process, but that's basically,
That is pretty meta.
Yeah. that was finding number one right there is like, hey, your audit process is not
all right.
Screening for any data integrity risks, really.
Okay. And how did they respond to that?
Yeah, that was interesting. In closing it out, and I brought up, hey, like this process itself is not effective for the identification of unreported stops. And right away, the question was, what do you mean by unreported stops?
Yeah.
I was taken a bit aback by that, right? What do I mean by unreported stops? I went about trying to define a stop and what that, in the requirements and state law about reporting, all that. They go, no. Unreported stops. Are you saying that these are happening here in our department? And I said, well, yeah, that's kind of the way the data makes it look.
Yeah.
So, the second really big component to this audit was doing pretty extensive data analysis and basically picking, I guess, what could be considered some key performance indicators on data reliability and integrity. And there was a few different tests that I employed, and I wish I could take credit for coming up with these tests. I didn't. They are actually, things that were previously recommended to the department, such as in that big collaborative reform report to the police department, and then some other sources of best practice literature that I was using throughout the audit. So there were 3 tests that I used to come up with indicators of data reliability. The first was what I called a zero stop day. So these are days in San Francisco where stops just weren't reported at all.
Okay. Per officer or just none across the whole board?
Yeah. So the nuance to that is I broke it down. I didn't focus on per officer. And San
Okay.
Francisco is a big city. So the odds of a stop not happening at all in the city are pretty, I would think, unlikely.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I got a little bit more granular with it. And so one of the things that the department itself does with the data is they geocode it.
Okay.
So yeah, so I was able to take the geocoded data and use the district station outlines. So basically, I think there's like 10 district stations in San Francisco, and I broke it down by district. Is like how many of these districts
That's cool.
are just reporting, reporting days without any stops at all. And what I found is that this phenomenon of zero stop days basically started in calendar year 2020. And I know there's some complications of 2020 being a COVID year,
Right.
but the number of days with zero stops increased from 2020 to 2022, including, and I'm going to refer to my report here real quick. There was including some stations that were reporting over 100 days a year without stopping or detaining an individual.
Okay. No way.
Yeah, it just seems a little improbable. So I broke that down in the little heat map, or maybe I'm using the term heat map inappropriately, but I broke that down in a color-coded chart.
Sure.
Showing how this phenomenon of zero stop days really escalated, post 2020. And it's possible that days without stops could be as a result of shifting enforcement priorities or changes in department staffing or even external factors like COVID-19. It also suggests the possibility of underreported stops.
Right.
So I had that chart ready to go at the first question about what do you mean unreported stops? That was helpful.
Yeah.
I had a second test that I performed, and this is something, again, recommended in best practice literature, I guess, basically as far back as this kind of reporting goes. And they said, cross-check your stop data with other sources of record in the department and look to see if those reconcile. So what I did with this test is I said, okay, of all the stop data that the police department is reporting to the state, I'm going to break out just the stops or detentions resulting from traffic stops. So I excluded all the pedestrian stops from the data set. And I said, okay, I've got now a population of traffic stops in the stop data. I'm going to reconcile that against the publicly available dispatch data that the city has, where they have coding of that dispatch information, and they can break it down by department, what the reason for the stop was. So there's a code in there for traffic stops in San Francisco's dispatch data.
Oh, okay.
And, what I found were discrepancies in the thousands.
Oh.
And that had been a persistent gap ever since these state reporting requirements were put in place. So I said, okay, right there, you've got two key performance metrics that, suggest the potential for underreported stop data.
One.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Yellowbook-CPE, the heroes behind the jumbo bundle of self-study courses. With a 1-year subscription, you get access to over 180 hours of top-notch CPE content. Dive into thrilling tales of agile, IT auditing, fraud, and internal controls. All courses carry NASBA's quality seal, so you know they've got the superpower of trustworthiness. Just click the link in the description to sign up. And now, back to our story.
When you said you were looking at best practices that were recommending these tests, who were you looking at?
Yeah, there's a few different things. So perhaps a matter of what's old is new. In 2007, I believe, the then mayor of San Francisco, Gavin Newsom, called in I think one of the experts in the field on this data collection and had them do a big assessment of the police department back then. And so some of these types of tests were pointed out to the department back then.
Okay. So a consultant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Came in at the time and, provided some recommendations to the department. So I got some test ideas from there.
Okay.
I mentioned the 2016 US DOJ report on the San Francisco Police Department, which had this whole appendix just dedicated to stop data and the quality of it. So they offered some test ideas.
Okay.
And then there was a couple other places. So the DOJ, I forget, through one of their bureaus, had put out some guidance on this separate, from not San Francisco specific in any way, but they've also issued guidance in the past. I forget the exact name of that publication. But if anyone in your audience is, looking to perform similar work, I can put you in touch with all the resources I used. The third place in the most current resource on this was a publication put out by the New York University School of Law Policing Project for Policing Equity. And they put out kind of what I call one of the modern stop data guidebook Bibles.
Oh, wow.
A really comprehensive document, was put together they pointed out and provided a lot of best practice criteria, beyond just
Okay.
beyond just the criteria set in department policy and at the state, like, I guess, better practices that departments or jurisdictions can aspire to.
Okay, great. Thank you for sharing that. That's amazing.
Yeah. I mentioned, the part of the impetus for this audit, although not related to data completeness, but part of the impetus for this audit was the, misreporting of race. And so I knew that this would have to be something that I would have to address through my audit work. I felt like the audit would be incomplete if I didn't get to this issue about, whether racial misrepresentation is going on. But, there's a lot of challenges associated with that, I think, from my end and just kind of looking at the data. But one of the things I did in preparation for this audit, or just to ensure I had the relevant or necessary skills to go out about performing the work, is I took a class offered by the California Peace Officer Standards Training Group, and they had one on for law enforcement agencies in California on the RIPA data collection. So I crashed that class, signed up for it.
Okay. What does RIPA stand for?
Sorry, that's the Racial and Identity Profiling Act of 2015. That's the state law that requires collection and reporting of this data.
Okay, so you crashed the class.
I crashed the class. I signed up for it, and I'm listening to the class, and one thing the instructor there says is, "Hey, don't select all 7 races when you're completing the stop data. It's improbable that you're going to be able to perceive all 7 races within an individual when you stop them." So I said, okay, that seems to be kind of a solid benchmark by which I can conduct some analysis related to the misrepresentation of race. So what I was able to do is go through the data and find the number of times officers checked all 7 racial categories for a single individual.
Okay.
And, what I found in that, like, any given year, it represented less than 1% of the total stops that were reported to the state.
Okay. Well, that's good.
Yeah. And it seemed to be kind of an isolated issue.
Now, what is the racial makeup of San Francisco? Is it very diverse, or is it mostly white? What is the racial makeup of?
I would say very diverse, but in terms of the actual breakdown, I don't have that.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, like I didn't use that. I didn't use the overall census data as a benchmark for comparing the stops against.
I'm still stuck on the guy just checking white all the time.
Yeah.
A little stuck there. Okay, so your first test was the trend that showed declining reports overall in the 0 days.
Right.
The second test was
a cross-check of stop data against dispatch records
to see if it even matched, and
right, and how big the discrepancy was.
Third test was what kind of checks are they making for the races?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
So I brought all this to the department's attention when, and I said, I hope that addresses your concern about, the reality of what's going on with the stop data. And they had a question, and we're like, okay, well, you're pointing these things out to us. Like, is anybody doing anything about this? And so I'm glad you asked. So, part of my audit too was doing a benchmark against other jurisdictions in the state of California, since pretty much every law enforcement agency in the state is subject to this reporting requirement. It's like, let's see what other jurisdictions were doing. Pretty quickly on, the thing that jumped out to me is that San Francisco, unlike other jurisdictions, does not require supervisors to review the completeness or accuracy of the stop data.
All right. So over time, people figure out, this doesn't really matter, probably.
Yeah, or no one's checking it at any kind of granular level.
Yeah. Okay. But other cities were, like LAPD was, and San Diego PD was.
You got it. LAPD, Sacramento PD, or even some small agencies that didn't have as many sworn members as the police department, but responded to basically or reported just about the same number of stops. So I broke it down by a few different dimensions.
Okay.
One was just the capacity to perform this type of work. So breaking it down by the number of sworn officers in the department. The second dimension I looked at was calls for service, which can be used as a proxy for kind of the workload of the agencies.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third proxy was just reported number of stops per year.
Gosh, this is so detailed. Man.
I think it was detailed. And so sometimes I wonder if I use a sledgehammer to hit a nail. But I think the thing that I was able to get to such a level of detail on it was just due to the just sheer quantity of guidance out there about how this type of process should work in a law enforcement agency, or what law enforcement agencies should aspire to do in the type of work they should be doing with this data.
So looking back on it, what do you think the nail was? You said you have a lot. You were looking at all different angles of the nail, but what is the nail?
Yeah, I think sometimes if you think about it like a layers of defense model,
Okay.
you got the officers themselves. They're being tasked to comply with this state law.
Mm-hmm.
One of the fundamental questions is, do they understand the law? Do they understand what's being asked of them? And do they understand why it's being asked of them?
Okay.
So yeah, there was a pretty heavy emphasis on what the training rollout of this looked like, and kind of my assessment of that against best practice as well. And what I found is that there were policies and there were training videos, but the training videos were focused on the technical steps needed to just complete a report in the system that the police department was using.
Okay.
It didn't really get into kind of the why about the data collection.
Yeah. Okay.
It just kind of said, hey, there's a state law, we're required to do this. But it wasn't providing the officers or the viewers with any kind of connection on the data's use to the overall goal of public safety in San Francisco.
Okay.
Again, going back to the best practice, this is something that folks have pointed out at the Department of Justice, or that if you're not providing officers with any kind of explanation about why, they may lack incentive to make sure this data is complete or accurate.
But police officers are just beleaguered, right? With this law, that law, this data, this rule. I mean, it's just overwhelming, isn't it?
Yeah.
For officers, all the things they have to comply with and all the ways they can they can mess up the documentation, right?
Absolutely.
This is one of many of them, right?
And that was a theme that emerged pretty early on too. So
yeah,
one thing, I do always want to consider the officer's perspective when I'm performing my work.
Yeah.
And so I might go about that a couple different ways. With this particular audit, I tried to meet the officers where they are. I signed up to go on a ride along at one of the busier district stations in San Francisco. And so I'm out there, I'm meeting with the officer, and I'm able to just kind of sit down with them and say, hey, take me through your process. How does this work? Are you able to use this form on your computer? Does this form work on your department provided mobile phone? Are you able to use this form on the computer inside your vehicle?
Yeah.
What kind of burden is this to you when, does it take you out, San Francisco busy jurisdiction, you might be going on a lot of calls for service. Do you ever just have to drop a form and come back to it later?
I'm sure they do.
Are you too busy? Things like that. So the other test I ran, or not test, I guess, but one thing I did is, as a one-person audit shop, I'm not going to be able to speak with as many officers as I want to at any given time.
Sure.
I made the decision to send a survey out to the entire police departments. And I did this electronically.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, sent it out via email. And I got about a 5% response rate of the departments.
That's pretty good.
18 or hundreds. Yeah, non-representative, but enough to get a sense of some of the perspectives in the departments.
Mm-hmm.
Published that, included that information in the audit report. But some themes were beginning to develop from that. And one of them, the themes had to do with the lack of satisfaction, I guess, around the tool that the department selected to collect the data with.
Okay.
And so we just heard it was buggy. We heard it was slow. We heard it was not that user-friendly.
No, it just keeps going.
Yeah. And I think that can have some issues too for data quality. So if you feel like the process is, if the process is burdensome, I'm just going to get through it, right? Or, hypothetically, you're just going to get through it, or maybe you're not even going to do it at all.
Yeah.
And that's some of the risks in that area. I was trying to benchmark and get some good information on, how long does this process take in other jurisdictions? And how long does it take here in San Francisco? And it's not going to be apples to apples because, not everyone uses the same platform to report and things like that. But this kind of concept of officer burden was also being used, I think, as an explanation about why the department had not put other measures in place to, like other added fields that could act as a check on the accuracy and completeness of the data. So I was able to find that with SFPD's system, it actually generates, date and time stamps about when a form was started and when a form was submitted. And I was able to collect all that data, look at it at scale, and come up with a median on how long it takes from starts to finish of these forms.
How long does it take?
Yeah, it takes about 5 minutes.
Oh, that's not as bad as I thought.
However, there's a couple caveats to that 5-minute time. So it had come down over the course of my audit period, I think from, what did it start off? Maybe about 7 minutes or maybe even higher to 5 minutes. So 5 minutes was about the median time. I was able to find another jurisdiction that published how long it took for their officers to complete a stop form as well, and found that their median time was about 2.5 minutes.
Oh,
So San Francisco was about double of that.
because of the slow software or the granularity of the questions?
Yeah. So in addition to the state's mandated questions, the police department began also including some questions of their own beyond that.
Oh, gosh.
Like a lot of enforcement agencies, San Francisco Police Department frequently gets questions about why are there disparities in their enforcement action. They believe by adding some different fields and modifying some of the fields, they could get at a more perhaps nuanced discussion about the disparities. I say that it takes 5 minutes, but with some caveats. And that actually led to, I think, another one of the report's more significant findings was on the system that the police department is using to collect this data. So for the majority of the audit period, the police department was relying on a web application developed by the California Department of Justice to collect this data.
Okay.
But halfway through 2023, they decided to transition to a new platform developed by a contractor.
In 2023, you said?
Yeah, about halfway through 2023, at the very end of June 2023.
All right.
And as I'm looking at the data, I noticed, so I can take it back and do a quick like pros and cons. With the pro of using the state's web application, it's built using the state's data dictionary. All the data validations are put in place by the state. That's a pro. With developing your own application, those validations aren't necessarily in place, or you have to do more testing around them to make sure the system is functioning as intended. For all law enforcement agencies in San Francisco, the state performs a back-end data validation, and they will let law enforcement agencies know that if there are any records they submitted that have errors in them or somehow missing information. I was able to take that information from the state and do some analysis on it. And what I found out is that basically from the moment the police department went live with this new system, there started to be a number of records with errors in them or omissions of information fields.
Mm-hmm.
For example, the police department in 2023 recorded 19,000 records approximately. About a third of those, 6,000 records, contained data validation errors or omissions.
Oh, wow.
And 99% of those errors occurred after they transitioned to a new data collection system.
Okay.
So, if you're missing fields in your system that are supposed to be there, that might also factor into how long it takes to complete the form.
Wow.
But yeah, I started digging in. I was like, okay, what was going on? Why are we getting all these errors all of a sudden? And kind of was able to parse through this. This was one of the more challenging analysis areas of the audit. Was the state makes this data available. However, it's in a comma separated file. And I will say that they are not the easiest records to go through. So as part of this audit, I had to use a tool I had previously not used as much in Excel, the Power Query function. And I pivoted, I pivoted again.
Okay.
Unpivoted again.
Wow.
To try and get the data in a
organized.
Form.
Yeah.
Yeah. To try and get the data organized in a way that might actually allow some analysis on what the error types are, to quantify those. But then not just to point out the errors. I also wanted to point out the implication of these errors on the department's operations as well. So I think this was helpful analysis that I was able to do.
How many days did it take you to massage that data and get it to be what you needed?
I think overall, from entrance conference to report issuance, this audit took 9 months.
Yeah. That was a 63-page report, right?
63-page report.
Yeah,
with a few, appendices kind of maybe stretching out the body.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, in terms of just massaging the data, it's always a process for me. First, I have to get the data. I look at it. I kind of think I got a handle on it just visually. Then I go to the data dictionary and I go back to the data. So, okay, maybe I misunderstood what that field was supposed to be for. And meanwhile, I'm going through the GAO's data reliability guidelines too. And I'm trying to aspire to meet all the guidance in there if I'm going to rely on this data,
Yeah.
Just in terms of just kind of brute force with the Power Query, it took me probably 2 or 3 days to get just like a handle on what needed to be done with this. Because, you give it a couple attempts and then you say, okay, I've got an output here. Now let's go back and spot check that, kind of
Right.
manually against it. Is this making sense? Is this reconciling? Oh, off. Better go back to the Power Query. And the thing I like about Power Query is it tells you, on the side, it tells you all the steps you've taken with the data. So I can go back and say, okay,
Oh, that's good.
yeah, where do I need to go? What's my audit trail on this?
Was that the summary of all your findings pretty much?
Pretty much, yeah.
So how did they react when you gave them the report?
Yeah, like I said, I think most of it was just around, most of the questions were around just the data issues about completeness and accuracy of records. That was where the bulk of the exit conference, centered around. I would say with our reports, so the report was issued in December 2023.
So really recent.
Yeah. And I gave a presentation on this reports to, again, our primary oversight by the Police Commission. I gave a presentation on the reports finding to the Police Commission in January 2024 at the first session of the year. Mm-hmm. So as soon as they got back in session after the holiday, this was first up on that agenda.
Yeah.
And, focused that presentation on just the data reliability issues and the system transition issues. It led to about an hour-long discussion afterwards about just some of the SFPDs, about just, as an oversight body, they're asking questions about some of the choices SFPDs made along the way in terms of the software they've used or the oversight practices they put in place and some of the decisions around that. It led to the commission asking the chief to make some commitments in addition to what the department already responded to in terms of recommendations, which they agreed or partially agreed with all of them. They asked the chief to make some additional commitments as it relates to providing them with some regular updates on just the data integrity, the status of data integrity using the tests that were part of this audit. So they instructed their people to use the same test you were using. Correct.
To verify. Okay. All right. Are they doing that to your knowledge?
So, some things have changed since that commitment. I guess, the biggest one is we're about to get a new chief here in San Francisco.
Yeah.
I'm an avid follower of our commission meetings. I think it's just a great source of staying apprised about what their priorities are and what the concerns around public safety are in San Francisco, so I can help come up with more informed audits as a result.
Right.
I haven't heard them provide any updates on the tests I use in the audit, although I did notice in the police department's, I think, recent or second to most recent public reports on stop data that they did provide an update on the number of errors in the stop records.
Okay.
That might be something we can monitor going forward in terms of, if it's trending in the right direction, which would be,
Are you following IA standards or GAO standards?
GAO standards, Yellowbook.
Okay. So are you going to follow up on your recommendations? Because you don't have to in the Yellowbook.
Correct. Yeah. I would say that's probably one of the limitations of being a single person audit shop.
Yeah.
Just some of my own personal risk preferences. I don't always have as much time as I'd like to devote to doing recommendation follow-up.
Yeah.
However, what I've tried to do is come up with a mitigation around that. And I want to give credit to the city controller's office as part of this. So they're a much larger audit shop operating here in the city of San Francisco as well. They also follow Yellowbook. I used to work there for, I think, 13 years.
Mm-hmm.
What we're trying now is we're going to test whether another audit shop can take recommendations that I've issued and follow up on them.
Oh,
And do a field follow up on there. So
okay, because they've got more resources.
They've got more staffing resources than I do, and that can allow me to keep going forward on doing audit work that addresses outstanding issues or things on my risk register. But I'm hoping it could also ensure that what gets measured gets done, and that we can keep apprised on the status of these recommendations.
Yeah. So what did you learn? You started by saying you're always a student, and me too, always learning things about auditing. What do you think was your takeaway as a professional from this audit?
Yeah, lots of them always from at every stage of the audit too. Like I said, being an single person audit shop.
Tough.
Yeah, tough. I got to come up with the scope, the objectives, so many learning lessons along the way.
But you needed that for that trend that proved one of your points, right?
Yeah.
You needed to look back.
Right.
So just contemplating your own scope is hard.
Contemplating my own scope, trying to come up with measurable objectives, trying to make sure my audit plan hits the big risks.
Response to their request, because it was kind of a requested topic.
Yeah, exactly. How does this report meet the needs of the people who ask for it? And I think didn't want to end up with a product that, just was completely unresponsive to what the concerns were.
Right.
Learned a lot about data analysis, including some new skills, which I don't believe I had at the outset of the audit.
Sure.
But there was just a lot. There's just, it was, like I said, 63 pages and kind of a granular level look at this program. I think I was really the first person to come in and take a look at the integrity of this data specific to this department since this state law went into effect. And as a result, I didn't feel like I had a lot internally that I could rely on. And so, like I said, they did purport to have an audit function, but that function really wasn't getting at what this audit was trying to do. So I didn't have any assurance there.
Mm-hmm.
So, it was a bit more granular look at things. Some might say maybe even too granular, but I think that's just a consequence or a function of being the first person to look at this. I think what I've done is kind of establish a good baseline going forward. Again, when I pick up this topic again, or if the controller's office picks up this topic again to look at the recommendations, I think what we have is a good baseline about where the department was and how to measure their performance going forward.
Did you start off as a police officer?
I did not. No, I've never worked in law enforcement.
Okay. So that also you got a deep dive into the world of a police officer.
Yes.
Which you probably gotten before.
Yes. You've done a couple other audits. I'm always looking to get more into that world to understand just the practical realities of trying to enforce the law in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
I had a laugh because before even taking this job, I was in a leadership program, and a member of the police department was in that program as well. And, we're making small talk and saying, what do you do for a living? I said, I'm an auditor. So really, being a police officer is a lot like being an auditor. There's a standard of conduct, and you're trying to assess someone's performance against that standard.
Mm-hmm. Well, this was great. I'm definitely going to put a link to your report in the show notes.
Thank you very much.
So that people can see. Yeah. And I love how you dug into the detail of the testing that you use. That's really going to help people. And what it was like to massage data that was comma separated. This is very instructive for people.
Yeah.
And where you got your criteria and where you got ideas for testing and how long it took you. I mean, this is all really good information. I'm really happy that you were that transparent about what you did. That's going to be very helpful.
It's an audit playbook that I'm happy to share with other jurisdictions, especially here in California with other law enforcement agencies that are also subject to this reporting requirement.
Yeah.
Other states have also rolled out racial and identity collection efforts. And so as this spreads, I hope this audit I hope people can learn from this audit.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to share along, anything that I've learned.
Yeah. Because this is a major issue. I mean, it got really, of course you got granular to get down to the data and get the true results. But from a citizen's perspective, this is a hot topic.
And it's something that, came up recently. Some citizens or some members of the public, I guess, were making some questions of my department. They're looking to, I guess, better understand some of SFPD's enforcement actions. And one of the questions they had was, should we be using the stop data? So it was a good opportunity for us here to meet with this group and also just explain to them, it's one thing to send along a report. And, I think to the point of, should the report be able to stand on its own? Yeah, you hope. But sometimes also the auditor needs to make the effort to meet with the community group, answer any questions, and just have a real discussion with them. Yeah. So it was a good chance to meet with them and kind of show them or talk them through some of the caveats with the data if they're seeking to use it to better understand.
Man, because, you are probably the expert on the data.
Yeah, I think myself and one of my other colleagues are probably outside of the San Francisco Police Department or outside of the California Department. I'm going to go on a limb and say that we're probably the two folks that have looked at more stop data records than anyone else, perhaps
in the history of the world, maybe.
Yeah. It's important data. Like I said, just, the data can be used, like you said, to come up with recommendations that, some agencies may end up adopting. Mm-hmm. Also, academics rely on the data to come up with position papers and studies of law enforcement agencies.
Oh, yeah.
I just saw that there was one public policy think tank the other day that issued a report that relied on stop data.
Oh.
And, in my mind, I'm kind of wondering, do they know that?
Is that valid?
Yeah, that 6,000 or so records were excluded from
the
data due to errors or omissions, and that there's other indications about data reliability here. And I think that's just one of the great things about being auditors, that we really do have to consider data reliability in terms of the conclusions that we come to.
Thank you, brave listeners, for joining us on this adventure. We appreciate your loyalty. Take a moment to subscribe and share this podcast with all your audit allies. And don't miss out on Yellowbook-CPE's upcoming webinars. Because every superhero needs their training, and Yellowbook-CPE offers continuing education that's relevant, convenient, and as thrilling as the fight for justice. Until next time, audit on!